Who is the New York City Board of Elections? Who are these people that were advocating this position?
Yeah, so it's not that Trump did it. It's just that what Biden had suggested is that we don't want to set any precedent to allow our president to postpone or cancel the election. And it's just a state agency, right? So the governor of New York, and now the attorney general of New York, board of elections commissioners. These are all these are agencies that are appointed by the state. And to Lucci's point, there's various levels on the state and city level where certain judicial and county committee and commissioner seats are appointed, certain ones are elected. But yeah, I mean, they administer elections in the state of New York.
What do you think is the motivation? I mean, it could be that they really think it is a public health argument. Like I imagine if the presidential primary were on that ballot, that there might be some incremental people that will go to a polling station that otherwise would not have. And so you can make an argument that, well, by doing this, we're going to sort of reduce that incremental number who are voting in a presidential primary that may have already been decided. That's one.
Sure. Well, you can extend that logic, Tom, to any race you'd like. You can say any race against any multi-decade powerful incumbent is essentially already decided. So why don't we just terminate those as well? Even the 4% of people who live in the 10th district, the 4% of people who lived or who voted in the 14th district in Alexandria's race in 2018 against Joe Crowley, who is going to be the next Speaker of the House, who outraced her 10-1, $3 million in corporate PAC and lobbyists money, and directly from the firms that these folks are supposed to be regulating. Then why don't we terminate those races as well? Because they're essentially predetermined. No one had ever challenged Crowley in 20 years. No one has ever challenged Nadler essentially in 30 years after he was appointed to the seat when his predecessor died 3 days before the primary in 1992. The man was posthumously appointed to the seat by state party, Democratic Party bosses. They said, vote Ted even though he's dead in 1992, days before the primary, appointing their party chosen vessel in the form of Jerry Nadler, now the number 2 House Democrat, the chair of the judiciary, the face of impeachment. And this is how politics is decided in the state of New York. So you can extend that logic to literally any single race, because there's 2 ways incumbents and politicians win in New York and maintain their power. The first is they make sure no one ever runs against them through many means. And the second is they make sure if and when someone has the audacity to run against them, that they split the challenger vote in all sorts of creative ways. Or even in this case, just cancel the election outright. So again, there is absolutely no boundary to that line of logic, because by definition, all these multi-decade incumbents who don't represent and are out of touch with their districts by generations, by decades. We're talking about a federal government, Tom, that still uses floppy disks, that the representatives sometimes don't even use email, less to say have apps on their phones. So this is the level that we're dealing with.
So let me just make sure I understand where you're going. Are you suggesting that interests that are aligned with Nadler are supportive of putting off this primary because they don't want his seat challenged? Or are you just saying like the broader Democratic Party or both parties don't like challengers in general and they like their favorites and they just all said in some smoky room, let's do everything we can to either split or suppress these upstarts?
It's not even a particularly smoky room. That's what's so fascinating about this process. If you look at the 80-page brief that we've been collecting evidence and gathering and going through, it literally says, if you look at the first page, it's like Andrew Yang on behalf of himself and all others. Jonathan Herzog, because we're part of a class action suit.
Mhm.
Jonathan Herzog, on behalf of himself and all other plaintiffs, Helen, so on and so forth, for the dozens of delegates who are represented as co-plaintiffs on the suit. And then all the counterparties, all the parties being sued, the governor of New York, the New York Attorney General, the people's lawyer. I used to work for the senior advisor and counselor to the New York Attorney General. I was taught that we are the last line of defense. We are the people's lawyer. We represent the people who can't afford, perhaps, private access to attorneys. And so we need a public system to protect and defend the interests of the people. The Board of Elections Commissioners. So this is the entire New York State Democratic Party. And it's not some theory. This is just, again, openly documented empirical reality. And I can walk you through some of the particular case studies, just in my experience, that illustrate just that, where the ballot access process, I think, shows this most clearly.
Where I lost you, Jonathan, was, hey, if you read the briefs, you see all these underdogs trying to get their voice heard, and then on the opposite side, and then that's when I lost you.
Gotcha. So not sure exactly where that was, but
I think you're saying on the opposite side, the counterparties were blank, that kind of called out in the open who's behind this.
The governor of New York, the New York Attorney General, the Board of Elections Commissioners, the entire New York State Democratic Party. I mean, the chair of the party, Jay Jacobs, went on live TV and said just as much. So it's all public record. The PR, again, there's no artifice to it. That's what's so incredible, is they're so drunk on power, and they're so used to everyone just taking it sitting down. If you look at the response to this initially, 80% of it was like, it's just how it is. 10% was like, fuck you. and then there was us, and we're like, see you in court. So it's just, again, it's power and politics at the most corrupt, disgusting levels.
Do you think they were surprised that you guys didn't back down? Because maybe they, right? Like, who goes up against the governor, attorney general, the Democratic Party?
Yeah,
these are not small forces. Yeah. And you guys are, trying on shoestring budgets. Was there any conversation with them to try and sort it out before it got this far?
I mean, to your point, again, who has the hubris to challenge, decades of power? Again, if you look at my seat in particular in the 10th district, the west side of Manhattan and South Brooklyn. So there were vacancy committees, this little box on our petitions to get on the ballot, where you have to collect thousands of signatures in person. And ours happened to coincide exactly as COVID came online. Now, Andrew Yang was top of my vacancy committee, which technically means if I were to die, he would get the seat or be able to appoint my successor. But little did I know how much weight this carried, because for nearly a half century, Tom, the person who has represented the 10th district has been selected by the party bosses after the predecessor dies in office. That is just how power changes hands. An incumbent holds a seat for 2 to 3 decades. They die. They say, vote Ted, even though he's dead. Ted gets 80% of the vote. They appoint Nadler. Nadler holds a seat for 3 decades. No one challenges him because they know what will happen to them when they do. And then the cycle continues. If you look at Nadler's vacancy committee, it's the same cast of characters. The people who are in city council, the people who are in various appointed positions, some of the people who are thinking about or who are already running for mayor of New York. So it's the same cast of characters. Everyone knows, stay in line, wait your turn. You'll be called upon when we've decided it so. And to your point, and we've come across this, even opening a bank account, a basic campaign's checkings account. Every single lawyer, essentially, in the city, every single for-profit investment bank or management firm, even consumer checkings account, it's all wrapped up together. And it's, again, this is not a conspiracy. It's just pure empirical fact. And I'm just laying out the fact patterns of the realities on the ground.
So I would not be surprised if there are conversations going on now where people in the party apparatus are saying, you know what, like this Herzog and Yang, like they're starting to cause trouble. And, you know, like, did that calculation come into your mind, which is like, hey, yeah, they're going to cause trouble. And had you considered the calculation of if you win or when you win, that you will need to work with some of these people in the power structure, and you don't want to be a rabble rouser because you're going to need to get stuff done. Like, how do you balance principles and, you know, what's right with playing the game to get things done for your constituents?
So the great thing, you know, the blessing and the curse, the reality of, you know, the position I'm in, which is like, you know, they've, you can't buy me with anything. And they've tried to hire us. They've sent death threat. Like you just can't. Nothing will stick because like I just don't respond to that currency. And like the more they throw at us, the more it just invigorates me and the team, because it just illustrates how weak they are. It just illustrates how weak they are, because you have to imagine, and you can look at the FEC filings, it's all publicly available, recorded data. I mean, the tens of thousands of dollars spent on consulting and market research and the like, and Oppo research, they've literally got nothing. And so that's what's so fascinating, Tom, is, you know, I don't want a job from any of them, anywhere, in any place, anytime. And so, yeah, and I completely understand the constraints that, like, you know, people feel like they have one hand tied behind their back, like even Nadler, even Cuomo, even the attorney general, because again, it's like, well, if I go out of line, then like this person appointed me to this job, or this person made sure that I would win the select, you know, like it's all, you know, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. And then that's how the system continues, because everyone feels like their hands are tied. But that's the magic of the Yang Gang. That's the magic of our movement, is that baked into the principles and the policies we're fighting for are like limitations of power, because we recognize its corrupting effect. And so, for example, passing judicial and, you know, 18-year judicial and 12-year legislative term limits, I mean, and passing publicly financed elections and passing ranked choice voting and structuring in these ways so that people who are already in power have an incentive to do it, i.e. by being exempted, let's say, from that legislative term limit. It's like we're just in it to build the future, fix the system, clean up some of this mess that for whatever reason everyone feels like their hands are tied to, and then get out. So again, that's the blessing and the curse. That's the reality of it, where there's no downside, there's only upside, and it's tragic. But as Andrew said from the get-go, as he told Muhan, who told me in the earliest days, and we had him on Dialectics recently, he was the first hire for the Yang campaign. There's no one in the wings. There are no adults in the room. The reason Andrew Yang had to run for president and chose to, and had the critical courage and leadership to, is because he had met the senators, the politicians, the leaders, the presidents, the philanthropists, the social entrepreneurs, the people supposedly running the show. And he said, there are no adults in the room. There is no one in the wings. It's painful. It's tragic. It hurts. It's shocking. We're going to be constantly incredulous and seeking for some sort of savior, but the savior is only ourselves.
Let me ask you this, Jonathan, as a hypothetical. let's say you were getting ready to push we turn back time and you hear about this decision to try and delay or postpone or whatever, and you're like, hey, that's not cool. I'm not standing up for this. And someone gives you a call, someone of great influence within the current power structure, and they say, Jonathan, you are a really bright guy. We see a lot of potential in you, and you're young. You're 25. Here's what's going to happen. You're not going to participate in this lawsuit. You're a smart guy. We're going to remember this, and maybe you could be on the staff of the Nadler team. Maybe when the next election comes around, we're going to strongly consider you as part of the team. Why would you throw that away? Like, how would you think about that sort of like chess game that might have been, if it were ever presented? Like, how would you think about that?
So I'll say two things. One is, this isn't hypothetical. I've had a number of conversations like this, but it's very simple. It's really quite simple. You look at Joe Biden's announcements of who's going to lead and co-chair and be on his committees for policy. Did you see anywhere on that list anything related to the Yang Gang, to Andrew Yang, to UBI? No, absolutely not. And so lest we had any kernel of doubt, any naivete that we'll win in the marketplace of ideas, they'll see the reason, they'll see the light, they'll come to our side and fight for what's right, and a vision that includes themselves, their families, and others, the answer is no, they won't. It's sad, it sucks, because it's like, all right, fine, we'll have to win. Like, all right, fine. It's like, we'll have to take over the presidency, we'll have to take over the House. Like, all right, if you insist.
Yeah, like you brought up Biden, who I think a lot of people respect in terms of his character and, his decades of service. But I also agree, like, even in this kind of crazy pandemic world with basic income really becoming more of a mainstream accepted kind of topic for discussion, I haven't seen much in terms of even like discussion of pilots or feedback on like the current stimulus plans. Like, what do you think is the calculation there, that they just think it's too